of their plan of care for a specific client. Now, where does delegation live in that process? That is an option for the RN in implementation of a specific plan of care intervention or strategy that includes the performance of a health-related procedure, or what we call a nursing procedure, once that health-related procedure is incorporated into the RN's plan of care. And then they authorize that unregulated assisted person to perform that for the client who may not be able to perform that procedure for themselves. Okay, so let's get on to the content. So our first rule number up for discussion, and that is the rule number 0000, and that is where you find the statement of purpose for the RN delegation rules. Now, changes from the previous version, what you're going to see is a lot of statutory language here. So that they're married and dovetailed with the Oregon revised statutes that actually direct the Board of Nursing to write these rules that prescribe the process and then what needs to be contained in those rules. Now, the good news is the terms that you're going to be seeing in here, such as other than licensed personnel, tasks related to the administration of medication, those terms are going to be used in such a manner further into these rules that they will describe themselves and hopefully not leave people confused as to what the purpose and intent of statements of these rules are. Now, general provisions. There are a couple of updates and revisions in this section. These are the general requirements or obligations that occur with application of these rules by the RN. Now, the big revisions in this section are basically reorganization of the previous content, which those of you who are familiar with these rules will probably notice. And then under the general provisions, you also start seeing more of those statutory terms. So terms such as tasks related to the administration of medication, other than licensed personnel. Now, for these two terms within this section, those terms are explained, or shall we say defined in here, so that you know that those tasks related to the administration of medication are going to be called nursing procedures, henceforth in the rules, and that other than licensed nursing personnel now means that unregulated assistive person or UAP. Terms such as procedural guidance, initial direction, as well as periodic inspection review, those will be explained or used in such a manner in subsequent rule numbers that you will know the meaning of what those terms mean. Now, the other big revision in this section is adding back into the rules an existing statute. It's ORS 6780363, and this is a statute that gives civil liability protections to the RN who delegates. So within the Division 47 revisions, you're going to see verbatim that language taken straight out of the Chapter 678 statutes and plucked into the rules just for easy access for the RN. Okay, going on to the next rule number, and here we start seeing more revisions. And this is rule number 0045, and this is the process for initial RN delegation. Now, the first thing that those who are really up on Division 47 trivia will notice is that this rule title has been shortened for clarity. So what used to be a 14-word rule title is now 4 words. Process for RN initial delegation. We'll make that 5. It's my Monday, so just bear with me. And this rule number, what you're going to find is it now expressly identifies 10 specific criteria that, when all met, will demonstrate a client care situation as delegation being a safe care option for the client. So it's 10 criteria, bam. The RN evaluates data, validates, analyzes that data, and if all those criteria are met that are in the rule, they may consider that client care situation before them whereby RN delegation is going to be a safe option for delivery of my plan of care strategy or intervention to deliver this health-related procedure or nursing procedure to the client. In this rule numbers, you're going to see the terms procedural guidance and initial direction. So this is what used to be called educating the UAP and then evaluating that UAP's learned outcomes of the content that's presented. Same process in these revised rules as existed in the previous rules. We do so some changes, however. We see some revisions in the process that the RN will use to evaluate the competencies, the accuracy of that UAP. Do they learn about the procedure, and are they performing it properly on the client? So the big one here, the very noticeable revision, is the language now is silent on the RN actually physically directly observing that specific UAP perform that ordered nursing procedure on the client. And when we say silent, you don't see those words in there anymore. So that means that the RN has a lot of discretionary authority as to the method that they're going to use to evaluate the safety of that UAP performing the procedure on their client. And if you have questions about this, please plug them into the chat, and we'll address those on the back end of the content presentation. Now, another big revision in this section is the RN now has the authority to authorize, if they determine that criteria are met, they've competently validated by whatever method they deem appropriate, that UAP is going to be safe in their performance on the client. When they authorize them, they can go up to a 90-day authorization period. Now, again, it's going to be based on the RN's clinical judgment, based on the same data or criteria they had to evaluate previously, looking at factors that are going to inform that decision. But that window of authorization has been markedly exceeded. So not to exceed 90 days, but can go up to 90 days. Another, and the final revision I'm going to talk about in this section is there used to be language that required the RN to make a recommendation for their care team members onto how this client's nursing procedure might continue to be delivered to the client in the event the RN is no longer has a professional relationship with that patient or that client, that resident, that student. This is no longer a requirement in this section of the rules. Okay, now moving on to the next section, and this is the section on periodic inspection, supervision, and evaluation. So again, this is new statutory language. This section used to be, I believe it was evaluating of the ongoing safety of the delegation for the client. So what we have here is the prescribed process set forth that the RN must use when determining whether delegation remains a safe care delivery option for the client. So what they're going to be doing is looking at prescribed criteria, data that they must look at to make that determination. Now, this process must occur, and the rules specify this, at least once before the end of that initial authorized period. And then if they determine that, yes, this remains a safe care delivery option and I'm going to reauthorize, then this will be a forthgoing process that will occur prior to the end of each subsequent reauthorization period for that specific UAP. Now, as in the previous rules, in this section, you will have standards that if the RN concludes that the delegation is no longer a safe care delivery option, that RN cannot reauthorize that UAP's performance of the procedure. However, there is a new standard in these rules that expressly states that, and although it sounds a little awkward, it literally states that nothing in these rules will prevent the RN from addressing an issue that might be causing that delegation to no longer be safe, taking action to resolve that issue, verifying its resolution, and then continuing on with that periodic inspection and review process, whereby then they would have the authority to reauthorize if all the criteria are met. Under this section 2 is another notable revision that instead of requiring the RN to directly observe the UAP perform the procedure on the client, the revised standards state that they must directly observe the UAP's performance of the nursing procedure. So what you see is absence of the words on the client. Again, this grants the RN that discretionary authority to use their clinical judgment in determining for this client with this situation in this environment with this UAP, how do I know that this is going to continue to be a safe delivery option? Of course, all that would need to be recorded and documented, but that authority exists, which means that whatever method the RN chooses is going to be up to the RN's discretion. Could be observing on another client, could be the use of simulation. Just expected the RN will document the data leading to that decision and then that ultimate clinical judgment that led to their decision. Again, with the previous rules, the period that the RN may authorize again or reauthorize is going to be 180 days. And then again, based on those standards we talked about at the beginning for this section, then before the end, prior to the end of that reauthorization period, then the RN must again provide that periodic inspection and evaluation process to determine the ongoing safety of the delegation. Okay, so this brings us to rule number 0050. And this is where we talk about limitations on delegation of nursing procedures related to the administration of intravenously administered medications or medications administered by the intravenous route. So within this section, aside from minor revisions on content reorganization, the major revision is actually the removal of permission for the RN who is an employee of a home infusion agency to delegate the administration of medications by the intravenous route. And the reason for this is that the state of Oregon currently does not license home infusion agencies. So it was kind of a non sequitur, so that was removed. So moving on to 0060, and this section talks about ending a UAP's authorization to perform the nursing procedure for the client. Those of you familiar with delegation know that this used to be called rescinding. It was changed for ending just for ease of reading and understanding for those who might not be familiar with the rules, or for the public who might have a loved one who's receiving delegation services. So these standards now expressly identify 5 reasons why an RN would and be required to end a UAP's authorization to perform the nursing procedure on the client. Now, it used to be 8. Being condensed down to 5, you don't really lose any teeth, so to speak. One of the standards that are remaining in the 5 is that the delegation is no longer a safe care option for the client. And those of you that have read the rules and are awake this morning, note that that is a frequent term or phrase I have been using. Delegation, a safe care delivery option, no longer a safe care delivery option. So when you're applying these rules and you're thinking, wow, I don't know if it's safe or not, I would direct you to go back to rule number 0045 for the initial delegation and look at those 10 criteria listed out that expressly quantify what a safe care delivery option of delegation looks like, and then you can apply those within these sections. Okay, there we go. So the last section I'm going to talk about are the rule numbers that have been repealed or removed. And this is specific to 0065, rescinding the delegation for a client and a UAP, and 0070, which speaks to requirements of a synchronous handoff by the accepting RN. So these former rule numbers literally addressed client handoffs and care transitions between an RN who was leaving or ending their therapeutic relationship with a client, or was no longer made the decision that they're not going to delegate anymore, as well as for 0070, that RN coming into the care situation who might be accepting what was formerly called a transfer of delegation, which was then termed a handoff. So these standards are gone. And what we look at is the RN, as with any practice situation, each licensee being accountable for their own practice of nursing and responsibility for practice consistent with the Practice Act, Division 45, Division 47 in this section, and that the board is not in the business, nor do we have the authority to regulate client handoffs specifically for certain practice settings. So you would look to developing policies of your own, making sure they're consistent with Division 45 standards on communicating client care information, responsibility for safe client handoffs, advocating for clients to receive appropriate services, and putting those in place for your practice setting to assist or promote or direct when this type of situation would have. You would have the policy that would direct each party, the RN who's leaving, maybe the RN that's coming on, as to what parts of the Practice Act they should be looking at to make sure that they're promoting the health and safety of the client, especially for the accepting RN when they're coming in and taking over responsibilities to provide nursing services and delegation services to that client. Okay, and so Selena, do we have any questions populating yet?
Ooh, had to find my unmute button. Yes, we have a few questions. First one is from Jeremy Ehrman, and the question was, is the 90-day period for the authorization of a new UAP delegation?
Okay, can you repeat that?
Can I repeat that? Yes. Is the 90-day period for the authorization of a new AP delegation?
I think the answer is yes. Yeah, once you authorize that person, you teach, you competency validate, and bam, then that delegation, you have delegated your authority that you would normally keep under nursing process and implementing your plan of care. You have now delegated that implementation piece of the nursing process to that UAP for that nursing procedure. So yes, that would be delegation.
Excellent. And then Christy had asked, does that mean one eval prior to the next delegation period or just the next delegation counts for that? I'm a little
Are you on, and can you unmute yourself and further explain that question so I make sure I understand it properly?
Hi, yes. So when we were doing the, when we have to eval them or, you know, after, so you have your initial one and then they're due for their next one in 60 to 90 days. The wording on that, does that mean you have to do an eval prior to the next delegation? As in one time within that 90 days, or the fact that their 90 days is coming up, does that count as their next delegation?
Well, bear with me. I hope I understand your question. So yeah, you've authorized them. Let's just say you chose initially to authorize them for 100 days, random number. So now prior to that expiration date of that 100 days, before that 100 days hits, you have a responsibility to go in and do that periodic inspection and evaluation. Now, that periodic inspection and evaluation process, wherein by itself, it grants you the authority to reauthorize if that situation is still safe for delegation.
Okay, perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Christy. So this was a direct question, but it also is a general question is, can we receive this PowerPoint? And the answer is yes. It'll be available on our website after the meeting. A couple questions from Christy Harry. First one is, does an independent nurse need to obtain orders from MD licensed prescriber to delegate?
If I understand this properly, there is no authority to delegate per these rules without a prescriber's order. So I'm not sure if that, whether you're independent or employed or contracted, the RN would need to start that process for a support written within their plan of care for their client. That procedure would need to be ordered. And then if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you want to further explain it, Chrissy, please go ahead.
I just am clarifying whether you need to write your own orders in order to support what you're doing delegation for. It just seemed like the way that the wording might have changed seemed like it was clarifying that there needed to be an order.
Yeah, there would need to be a prescriber's order for the procedure. I'm not sure what you mean by write your own orders.
I'm used to working with an agency that requires orders written, and so I'm used to doing that as a routine procedure. But sometimes as an independent nurse, people don't have obtained orders that they can look at and point to and say, this is an order saying that this procedure needs to be delegated. Does that make sense?
Are you a nurse practitioner with prescriptive authority, or are you just?
I'm not a nurse practitioner, no.
Okay, so I'm still confused about your writing the orders. And so, yeah, you would have to, any RN, regardless of which community-based care setting they're in, what triggers this process is there is a prescriber's order. This is required by statute that is written. And then the RN has the authority to, based on these rules, based on Division 45 grounding their actions and then application of these rules in a community setting, to how do I implement that medical order for my client, and then you apply these rules. So without a medical order.
Yeah, I mean, do you have to have a physical, order in front of you that you see and can look at that says this person has a trach and needs to be suctioned? Like, does that make sense? And
yeah, I think I would respond to that being the prudent RN based on the application of Division 45 rules for accepting and implementing orders would absolutely want to have verification that yes, this prescriber prescribed this. Now, The format, we don't regulate formats of orders, so that could be further interpreted by the policies of your setting or the context of care. But the prudent nurse would want to see that prescriber's order to make sure that it's thorough, it's clear, it's accurate, it's appropriate with the prescriber's plan of care for that client, and that it's current. Board of Pharmacy rules regulate length of orders. Is it over a year old? So all those things ERN would want to look at to make sure that for this client in this situation, this is the order for my client.
Thank you.
And if
And
I
Rachel?
may, Gretchen, I think the last point you made may speak to what Chrissy was asking, and maybe what others may be wondering is, these are really simplified, and they're simplified because the Board of Nursing doesn't need to regulate what your agency does. What your agency is asking that you have written down for clarification for what your organization's policy is. We are just specifically speaking to delegation within the license of the nurse and the unlicensed person. Excuse me.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay, I was wondering, at the beginning, you talked about the increased 90 days for the first delegation. So can we go out 90 days after our first delegation now?
For the initial delegation, you can go up to 90 days based on the client's situation and based on the criteria that are provided. Yes.
Okay, and is that a change from 60 days?
Yes.
Okay, so we can go out 90 days now. Okay, that's helpful. My second question was, are you telling us now that we do not have to visualize each? I work in community-based care in an assisted living facility. So I have always observed every med tech with every resident, with every procedure, with every med. So that means if I have one person, if I have one med tech, I observe her give through an insulin pen to the resident the Humalog and the Novolog, even though it's all with the same pen. So now are you telling us that we only have to watch, we don't even necessarily have to watch them, we can do it through simulation and or demonstration off of the resident?
That's what the revisions in the current rules are codified. Yes.
Okay, is that going to change this from a delegation to a teaching procedure?
No.
Okay.
Now, the authority for you to do those, injectables,
Right.
through tubes, all that procedural stuff that gets those medications into the body, it is still falls under the auspices of RN delegation. You just
Okay.
have a lot more discretionary authority in your setting as to how you're going to make that determination that UAP is safe with the client.
Okay, so just to be clear, we do not have to watch every med tech, every resident, every procedure, every med. So now I can do it sitting, like what I do now is I do a simulation at my desk and then I watch them do it in real life. So the simulation at the desk would now be sufficient.
It's going to depend on the needs of your client and this Mills and Scullett. I can't even talk.
I know what you're saying. If I feel,
Knowledge
it's,
and
as
skills of
long
the
as I feel
individual.
safe and everybody's
So, yeah.
safe, then that is the case.
It's
Okay.
if it's safe for the client. So yeah, nursing judgment.
Okay, great. And then,
And that's a perfect question that really shows to, we're not going to tell each facility how to do it. We are going to regulate the nurse and understanding competency, making it simpler.
yeah, it is very time consuming. However, I think what I'd like to just mention is that the safety of the nurse's discretion on the safety of the administration of this is going to be the big one. I don't know that I'm going to be changing my practice any, but I see what you guys are saying.
Thank you.
And then I have quite a few more questions from the chat. Katie B and it asked if delegation is a new service a company would like to provide to UAPs, can a nurse with that company refuse that work?
Well, that's a good question. The sole decision to delegate or not rests with the individual registered nurse.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I could open up a business tomorrow and I could hire 12,000 RNs, even though they don't exist. And it could be that not one of those RNs is going to think it's a safe care to delegate this one procedure for my clients. So be it.
Thank you. This is from Barb Hansen, and there's a quote from the Division 47. In this line,
And is there a roll
85,
number?
yeah, so 470030, general provisions 1 little a.
Okay,
The registered nurse may delegate to other than licensed nursing personnel. Is a CNA considered as being someone who is in this category, or is a CNA considered as being part of the licensed nursing personnel category?
that answer can only be answered by that CNA's position description.
Okay,
What is their role that they are hired to in the employing agency? And
okay,
if they're a CNA, no, it's not these rules. If they're a UAP, assistant person, direct care staff, apply the rules.
there's a little bit of an explanation. It says, I ask this because some hospices employ CNAs and some employ hospice aides who are not licensed CNAs, but who have passed the home health hospice aid competency exam. I want to know if these rules could apply to both or only to those who are not licensed CNA.
Again, it's going to depend on what their role is, and the board doesn't regulate position descriptions. It doesn't regulate requirements of position descriptions. So that's going to happen at the employer level.
Okie dokie. Thank you. Next question from Debbie Rayburn. If the RN is no longer required to recommend how the procedure will continue when they no longer have oversight of the client, like they leave the CBC setting, is it then the responsibility of the licensed entity to figure this out? And if so, where's the new rules in this clarified?
So for the first part of that, it's once the RN leaves, that relationship is done, null and void. Now, some settings will have rules that literally specify that the setting is responsible to provide any ongoing nursing services that might be required intermittently. Not all settings do. So again, it's going to go back to the rules of the setting. The RN, the authority of the board is over the individual RN. So once that RN is out of the picture and no longer in that area, board can't write rules on that. We have no legal authority or jurisdiction to do so.
Can I make?
Please, yeah, Cynthia, are you trying to make a comment?
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to make a comment that it's my understanding that APD is in the process right now of writing interpretive guidelines that will address what happens if an RN is no longer able to provide delegation in a community, and you've still got these nursing procedures that have been delegated. And so it's my understanding, what we think is that information, those interpretive guidelines, will be out this week.
Thank you for bringing that up. And for those not familiar with the acronyms, that would be Oregon Department of Human Services, Aging and People with Disabilities, correct?
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Gretchen.
Thanks. Thank you.
Right, next question is from Sonia. The rules don't include the terms supervise or supervision. Is there a place where this is a supervision equivalent, or is that no longer a responsibility of the delegation or the delegation?
Well, I will say yes or no. So again, RN delegation does not exist outside of nursing process. And so for the RN and adherence to Division 45 rules, when they have delegated or assigned anything, there is that responsibility to evaluate the efficacy of the plan of care in relation to client outcomes. And then the RN's supervision, so to speak, of persons to whom plan of care activities have been doled out to, that piece falls there under the supervision. So yeah, you're not going to expressly see that language in 47, but an application of nursing process and our responsibilities for this is my plan for my client. Is it safe? I'm getting the outcomes I want. That supervision piece is woven in that process.
All right. Thank you. Next is from Krista. If a periodic inspection is missed, does a delegation have to be completely restarted?
That's going to be up to the RN's clinical judgment. If it goes past the authorization period, it's pretty much null and void. You come back in, you've got the same client, the same environment, the same care provider, the same procedure. You've got a lot of data upon which you can make a clinical judgment on how you're going to proceed. You're still required to make sure all those 10 criteria are in place and it remains safe. And then it's your clinical judgment as to how you're going to proceed to make sure that you can validate that that care provider UAP still has the skills to provide safe services to your client.
Okie dokie. Next question is from Crystal. When a new delegating RN starts at a facility community, is there no time frame for the new RN to perform her initial authorizations? Second question is, will that need to be set out by the new company's policy surrounding delegations?
Okay. And so whoever asked that question, could you unmute and clarify your first question so I make sure I understand it?
It was Crystal Neese.
Sorry, my thing was not working. So before, like when someone took over delegations, there was like a 30-day period to reevaluate and that sort of thing. Is that, and I didn't see that in the new rules. Is there a time frame, or will that be something that the individual companies will need to be set out?
To that, I will say that there is no time frame. There was not previous. That was probably set by facility policy. And each RN is going to have to self-regulate their actions and take on as much as they can do safely. And that you will notice within the revised criteria for a safe delegation, as with the previous version, there's language in there about appropriate resources, which also means time that the RN has as to how many, which would include how many, what's their client load, what are the expectations, what are their other position responsibilities, and are they physically and emotionally and energy able to do what is expected of them by your employer, which might mean no, in that this is really a job for 3 RNs, not 1, with this client load that has come into this business to receive services. So that's going to be an individual decision, and that's also going to have to be clarified with the employer as to how that works. And all I will say is you can only eat an elephant 1 bite at a time.
Thank you.
And then the second part of your question, since you're unmuted.
Well, was just if there was a time frame, was it supposed to be in part of the new company policy?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Next question is from Tim. Are there limits on what care task can be delegated, or can any and every care task ordered by a physician be delegated?
That's a great question. So their Division 47 makes no prohibition of any health-related procedure an RN may consider to delegate. However, again, this takes you back to Division 45, and there are some standards in there that the RN needs to self-regulate and only do those activities that fall within their individual scope of practice, meaning something that RN has the own knowledge, skills, and abilities to safely perform and knows how to perform that procedure, whatever is ordered. So it's going to have to be a health-related procedure that falls into the RN's individual scope of practice, and that's appropriate to perform in the setting. Now, with the individual scope of practice standards, one of those is it's not prohibited by the Practice Act, so nothing's prohibited at RN. There's nothing expressly. That's now how the practice of nursing is regulated. It's not defined by the performance of procedures or health related. It's a cognitive application of knowledge practice. However, there are certain other activities that maybe not are in RN scope to do. That's why we need physician orders for those. And then as long as the RN has the knowledge, skills, and abilities, they're competent, it's something or a service or procedures that's allowed in the practice setting, then that's how you start ruling in what can and cannot be delegated by the individual RN in a specific practice setting or context of care.
All right, thank you. Another question from Chrissy. Initially, the rules stated that medication administration wasn't a delegated procedure. It sounds like that has changed. Is that correct?
That is not correct. So what the statutes say and what the Division 47 says, it's tasks related to the administration of medications. A medication is not a procedure. It's a chemical, it's a drug. So it's that procedure that could be get the medication into the body, or a procedure that takes something out of the body, but it's not the medication proper, nor the administration thereof. If you are administering medications via jejunostomy or gastric tube, employed by a home health agency, or administering things intravenously, then it's that procedure that gets that medication into the client that's delegated.
And then when are these new rules officially implemented?
Oh, thank you. September 1, Sunday.
Mhm.
So they're like what, 2.5, 3 days fresh.
Hot off the presses. Cynthia, comment from Jeremy. This change will be very beneficial to RN delegators who have worked with UAPs for a long duration and know the competency levels of those at UAPs.
Oh, thank you for that feedback.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
And
So
question.
could I this is Cheryl again. So I was sitting here thinking about, the competency, and we talk about, RNs delegating, and they really need to be sure about who they're dealing with, how well you know them, and how well they're able to perform this task. So I think what my comment is, one is that, if you're going to try to rush through this and delegate a procedure that this person is not able to do, or you're not confident they can do, that is what comes back on the RN, teaching being one of the big ones. The other one is, when you start, let's say you get into a situation at a facility where you either you leave quickly because of safety issues, or you once you terminate your relationship with your employer, and you've gone out of the building and you're not coming back, whether it be, I'm done, or whether it be you give notice. Once you terminate your employment with this person, does your delegation as well as your responsibility terminated at that time?
Yes, it would.
Okay. And the other thing I want to clarify is that when you start a job with somebody, and they say, I oftentimes say that I don't delegate for scheduling purposes. So a lot of times I'll get into a situation where somebody's more or less, I don't want to say forcing, but definitely pushing the issue of having these people delegated because we need a med tech on swing shift. So I've had to make that fight several times. So I just want to make really, really sure that my relationship with delegation has been between the state of Oregon and myself. It doesn't really matter where I'm physically working. So if I remember that when I delegate someone, it doesn't matter if I'm working here, there, or elsewhere, whatever that person does, or whatever happens with that delegation, is between me and the state of Oregon. So let's say I don't do the proper teaching. I don't familiarize myself with this person. I don't make it very clear to myself how much and there's a matter of trust here too, that I always, there's a level of trust that I've discovered over, 25 years of doing this, that you have to have with this person, that they're going to do the right thing for this resident, whether they like you or not, because nurses aren't always the most popular person in a facility. So once you have developed that relationship with that person, your teaching is done, and etc., and you've documented your teaching, that is your weapon, if you will, for saying, I did the best I could do, and I followed every single rule that you set out. And if this person decides to screw it up, royally or otherwise, I've done my job. I just want to make sure that's true, because that's how I operate. And that's how I just want to make sure I haven't gotten off the track somewhere.
No, that's true. With permission, I shall clone you to help spread the word about RN delegation. No, that's true. It's the RN's licensed with the Oregon State Board of Nursing. And that's where these rules come into play. There's a lot of other stuff that make delegation happen in the state of Oregon, a lot of other, provider organizations, other rules, other agencies, other situations. But at the end of the day, in application of these rules, it's the individual RN and their clinical judgment on whether it's safe or not.
Okay, yeah, because I mean,
sole determinator.
I think I've always looked at it as being, it is my nursing license, which I can use in various and assorted places. And, so I guess I'm willing to leave if it's going to mean an unsafe practice. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, it's your documentation. I mean, it's your memorialization of your practice journey with that client, with that UAP, and the decisions made whereby you can make an account of, A or B.
Okay.
So yeah, say push comes to shove and some nefarious character makes a complaint to the board. you are very defendable and you're accountable for your practice. And
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next question is from Cynthia. So essentially, the authorization is a legal agreement and one that explicitly states when the authorization ends. If the RN does not do the required nursing activities to determine if reauthorization will be granted, the authorization expires, correct?
correct.
Okay. And then from KDB, with each delegation renewal period, is a new order needed for the next approved period?
To that, I would say there has to be a current order in place. And that order might, be mobile and wrap around an authorization period. But with each authorization, the prudent RN is going to make sure that whatever order is in place that's prescribing that procedure to begin with is still current, is still in place, and is still safe for the client. And if it's missing, then, have that discussion with the prescriber, and then follow the policies in your by your employer. You're going to do a telephone order, you're going to get a faxed order, electronic, to get that in place.
Okay. Chrissy Harry asked, has there been any change to delegation to family members? Some UAPs I see in the community are family members that are being paid.
Yeah, the RN delegation rules for the board have never been equated with compensation reimbursement. So per statutory definition of the practice of nursing and the RN being allowed to teach a family member anything that doesn't fall under these rules. Now, might an RN want to apply these rules when they teach a family member? Probably going through the same processes to make sure that family member is safe in providing services to their loved one. But it's not a requirement of the Division 47 rules. And Cynthia has something to say.
But it is a requirement right now, or it is mentioned in Division 48. So that's a whole other subject. And
Yeah,
it might be what's confusing, right?
Yeah, because
Yes.
Division 48 is for designated care providers. It is not delegation, but since it's with family members and stuff, people sometimes get the two confused.
Gretchen, I'd like to clarify that I've had a situation where I had an admit, and there was no consultation with the RN about the status of their diabetic, where they are with their diabetic. And, we had sliding scale, a whole bunch of other stuff going on. So I did not delegate in this facility, but and the family members were coming in to give the insulin, and I did not delegate them. So I want to be sure, because what I'm thinking is I don't have to delegate family members coming into the facility in which I work to delegate them, which I did not do because I'm not taking that whole thing on. But just to be sure that I guess what I'm saying is if somebody comes into your facility and they are not delegatable, you're not obligated to delegate them just because they showed up here.
No, for the RN, it's solely your decision.
Yeah, thank you.
And there's no legal requirement based on Nurse Practice Act rules or statutes that you delegate to family members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from Linda. Just to be clear, there's no such thing as a prescriber ordering RN delegation. Too many new administrators think a medical order will mandate anything. Not true.
Yeah, I think I'm confirming that. So yeah, there's no.
Oh my goodness.
RN.
Yeah. Christy said, under what number are the 10 criteria listed out?
That would be under rule number 0045. And that's for initial RN delegation, process for initial RN delegation. And so specifically, it's going to be 0045, 1, and then little a through J, I believe.
And then Barb Hansen asked, will some of these questions be listed under FAQ on the OSB website? I think that would be really helpful to folks not able to hear from this webinar. And our illustrious leader, Rachel, responded, to improve communication, we will not only have this on YouTube, but are updating the FAQ and adding a change advisory.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Gretchen. So that's like all there is.
Like you
Um,
wanted to clone Cheryl, I would love to clone Gretchen, and there's only one of her. So some of these, we pulled the old FAQ down. There's a few tweaks that need to happen, and we have the change advisory. So stay tuned, Barb, and it will be this week, I'm sure, as well as this YouTube, this recording of this.
And can
And
I
I
ask
just
a
want-
question?
Please.
I didn't want to type it out because I know you guys have already talked about it. I just want to make sure I understand it. So in a perfect world of delegation, let's say it's a G-tube, within 90 days, you do your initial delegation. Within 90 days, you're going to redelegate. You're going to check them again.
We don't have the term redelegate in Division 47. You're
Right. We're
you're
going to reassess.
reauthorize. You can
Right.
reauthorize for another period. Yes.
Right. And then we have up to 180 days to do that again. Is that correct? So then we would just keep doing 180 days. Of
If it's safe for the
reauthorization.
client. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. And so there's no need to pop in and check on them in between. If we feel it's sufficient and they are well trained and the client is safe, we can just keep that schedule pretty much.
Yep. That's per your clinical
perfect.
judgment. Yep.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and Summer, if I can add to that, thanks, Gretchen, for saying per your clinical judgment. The goal was that we could extend it, but if the nurse doesn't feel that it's appropriate, they don't have to wait that long.
Right.
Yeah.
So extend to make it allow us to use our critical thinking skills and what is appropriate for that situation, but could potentially go sooner.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right. And Cynthia?
Well, and just on that, I think it's really important, that everyone understands as we're out there in the community that that 90 days and 180 days is not what you're going out to automatically. You're doing that based on the condition of the client. You're doing that based on the competence of the UAP. And yes, you've got to know if there's any changes going on, because that's part of that rule that talks about you may have to go out and do additional periodic inspection based on changes in the client. So we can't get into a situation where, everybody's automatically going out 90 days or everybody's automatically going out 180 days. That's going to vary across the board. And I just hope everyone really understands that that's the intent of these rules, is that it's based on the RN's discretionary judgment of all of these things. And some people might be 45 days, some people might be 30 days, some people might be 2 weeks, some people might be 90, some people, when you're getting into that reauthorization, could go 90 days, 120, but you've got to have clear, a clear assessment based on that, right? To be able to make that judgment. And it's not just going to be a cookie cutter approach.
Thank you.
It can't be. And that's what, from, I will tell you from listening to surveyors, that's what they're going to be looking at when you're looking at in assisted living, residential care, adult foster care, and also I'm sure with in-home care and home health and hospice, they're looking to make sure there's not a cookie cutter approach to the application of these rules. Thanks.
I have a question and a suggestion. The suggestion is that agencies and ALF, RCF, AFCH need RN to help them write policies and procedures related to how they admit clienting needing RN delegation. There are so many that are needed. And, I guess as a clarification more than a question, it's CBG to a UAP falls under delegation and the need for follow-up and reauthorization.
That one, it depends. Typically, the prudent RN, when testing for capillary blood glucose, is part of the process for the administration of subcutaneous insulin. They're connected, and the prudent RN will connect that in their initial direction and procedural guidance. Okay. If you have just CBGs as a standalone, maybe the person's on metformin, or maybe they're not on any medications for blood sugar. It's just a standalone thing every so often. You're teaching it. So there's no one size fits all answer for everybody. When it's involved with insulin administration, subcutaneously, the prudent RN is going to connect that as part of that process to make sure that this is safe and the client's health condition is such that they're responding consistently and stably each time this procedure is given.
So Gretchen, so when, so blood sugar, so the way I look at this is blood sugar is a teaching process. I mean, fundamentally, this is a teaching thing, but if you're doing it with somebody who's getting insulin, I do it where when I'm delegating somebody, the blood sugar is included in me observing them giving the insulin. However, my paperwork is such that I have a blood sugar teaching paperwork that says, yes, I've taught this person how to do it because it technically is a teaching matter. Then that is kept in the front of my notebook for each one of my UAPs, but not under each individual diabetic. Under each individual diabetic is my justification for delegation. So am I okay not to have a blood sugar paper in front of every single diabetics, every single thing? Because I do have, because you know, one wants to rely on their diabetic assessments also to figure out whether you're going to redelegate people or not. Multiple insulin changes, multiple blood sugar changes, hospitalizations, etc. That's going to change the picture of this person. So if that's happening within a 180-day period, I would think that one would want to do another evaluation and possibly additional delegations if that is deemed to be safe. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes sense. And I don't have the authority to tell you what paper needs to be in your delegation binder.
Okay.
But yeah, it's use your clinical judgment and what makes sense to you. And I'm sure that is going to be fine.
Thank you.
Gretchen, I also think that depends a lot on the setting and how the setting is going to review that alignment with the CBG and the delegation itself and that authorization period. So I don't necessarily know who was asking that question, but I think that is also a setting question and who is regulating that delegation from a setting perspective.
Who took my remote? Who took my remote?
There was for further clarification to that last question, this would be for a nurse teaching someone who works at a different facility, RTC. If that
I don't
helps.
know what that means.
Okay.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the situation is that I work in family practice and we have a residential treatment facility
Okay.
asking us to train their UAPs to do CBGs and potential insulin administration. I technically would not have a way to do like a follow-up with them because they're asking us to do all of their staff when they come on board. So the kind of thing is we're kind of pushing back saying no, because I don't have that ability to do the follow-up. And then also the question would be, aren't these facilities supposed to have somebody who's doing this for them?
Yeah, I can't speak to the facility piece, and maybe Rachel can chime in on this too, considering your experience with your former advanced practice clinic. But do you just want to take this one, Rachel?
I can try. So I think what you're referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, but how do we act as the advanced practice registered nurse, nurse practitioner, as the prescriber and also the delegator? And this was the situation I found myself in as a clinician, where I would care for those living in their adult care home and long-term care, and I was the prescriber. And if there was workforce issues, asked to be the delegator, and I declined that. Now that was me declining because I didn't have a policy in place with my organization that we could be both. And I don't think that it's probably appropriate. And maybe your facility needs to understand the issue of you being the prescriber and those working in the residential facility being the unlicensed that need the delegation task of what you prescribed. And I think maybe there's just some education that's needed there so that you're not both, if I'm understanding correctly. And then I don't know if Cynthia, when you're going into long-term care, if you're seeing anybody else or residential being able to be both. And maybe there's just some education that needs to happen there.
I'm just, I'll unmute here. Sorry, it took me a minute. I think also is the residential treatment center, I mean, so you're in a family clinic and they're wanting you to delegate there. It just to for you just to be the person to come and teach all their CBGs and then to also delegate everyone. Is it because they don't have a nurse and you're a nurse at the clinic, or are you a prescriber at the clinic?
A nurse, an RN at the clinic.
Nurse at the clinic. Okay. And
see.
so I
So
mean,
you're
you
the
know,
nurse.
I could see you doing, you know, if you're training competency right on CBGs, but with insulin, if you're not going to have that relationship with the client, then it wouldn't meet that criteria, and they would really need to find their own nurse to have that relationship with the client and with the person that they're authorizing delegation. And I'm going to put it back over to Gretchen to see if I said that correctly.
No, absolutely spot on.
Yeah, our stance on it has been that, like, we are the doctor's office, we are the prescribers of the insulin, but because I technically have no direct relationship with the staff and I have no way to verify that they're continuing to do the procedure correctly, it's not within my purview, and they need to do some sort of in-house kind of setup for that.
Yeah, correct. Whatever their setting, whatever regulations, laws, rules, statutes are in place for their setting, for their residents who might need those services.
And I am speaking completely out of line of what we're talking about here, delegation, but I think what you're speaking to is this planting a seed around what does competency look like in the future of when we need unlicensed people caring for those, and the multiple settings we have people living, from temporary lodging motels all the way to this example of residential facilities. But in this specific case, the nurse that has the relationship would need to be doing that. And so maybe there's some going back to educating the clinic and the residential facility of what is needed. They may not understand that.
Thank you, Rachel.
Question from the chat. Kimberly asks if you could define relationship with resident as it relates to remote support.
That's not defined in the Practice Act, so no. Sorry.
Maybe I confused by using the term relationship. We were talking about that the nurse that just asked the question works at a primary care clinic, doesn't work as a nurse in the residential facility, so therefore no relationships there, but it isn't any specific definition. If that is why you asked, just to clear that up.
They had added particularly in light of RN shortage, but I don't know if that clarifies much.
Okay, next question, or are we through?
Currently, that it was the last one in the chat. Oh, well, I spoke too soon. Cynthia, this is a response. The words in these rules are to continue to engage in nursing practice with the client. And this is also a comment from Crystal. I feel these changes are great for delegating RNs with long-term relationships with experienced UAPs in the CBC setting. Personally, I feel it's still best practice to closely watch new UAPs with each resident, perhaps several times, until the RN is completely comfortable with authorizing the UAPs to do insulin.
Gretchen, you should
Which-
give your closing thoughts. It's noon, and
It
as I've
is.
called you the queen of delegation, and all of the work you've done over the last year with the Rule Advisory Committee
Oh.
and the board, I think any closing thoughts would be great.
Oh my gosh. Well, just a heartfelt thank you to all of the people who participated in the development, in the editing, in the feedback of these rules to get them as to where they are today and in place. I think as a practice authority in Oregon, we're moving delegation forward. I look forward to the continued outreach we have with the board and working with each and every one of you for future events. If you have questions, please send those in, comments, recommendations. And Selena's working. She's been making notes of all these Q&As. We're going to be using that as our starting point for the FAQs for the board. Like she had indicated, we're going to have the slides available on our website. And I just appreciate your time and everyone's time and knowledge and expertise in making Oregon a great place to practice.
Thank you so much, Gretchen.
Okay, so thank you all, and you have enjoyed the rest of your day.